Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is Colleen Stewart. Early in her career, Colleen put someone to sleep during a business presentation, and determined to never let that happen again, she started studying great presenters to learn their secrets. Today, she's the co founder and creative director of Perfect Pitch Consulting Group, where she helps businesses connect with their audiences by telling their unique stories. And some of her clients include companies like Bayer, the Home Depot, and Avon. She's also the author of The Story Compass, Navigating Through Uncertainty in Your Business. Colleen seems absolutely lovely, but she's also that person who actually wrote a book during the first COVID lockdown, so I can't help but hate her just a little bit. Ladies and gentlemen, Colleen Stewart. Colleen, welcome to the show.
Hi, Francisco. Thanks for the introduction. Hopefully, I'll win you over. Win you
what
back from hating me.
what I thought was more ironic is that you did the thing that most people would have considered the most annoying thing to do when the first lockdown happened, which is you actually took the time where the whole world was falling apart to finally write your book. But right at the beginning of your book, you're moaning about LinkedIn, about people telling everyone else that they need to get a grip and do all these things, which I thought, I mean, I wasn't sure you caught the irony of that, so I had to highlight it for you.
I have a confession to make. So, most of that manuscript was complete before COVID happened. I mean, it needed a major overhaul because it was a rambling, all encompassing, like everything I ever wanted to say about storytelling on the paper. So it was in need of a serious edit. And when COVID hit and every single contract my company had was canceled, I did go through, about 3 or 4 weeks of just sitting on the couch feeling, I think like a lot of people, feeling totally shell-shocked, like not really understanding what the future was going to look like, and being very concerned not only for my business but for my own ability to to put myself back into that manuscript. And in fact, I wrote a LinkedIn article in those early days expressing all of that emotion, and my editor said to me, I think that's now the first chapter of your book, or at least the introduction. And that really fired me up again for the whole project. So I can't say I wrote a book from scratch during COVID, but it's certainly the idea came together, and I put the work in needed to get the book out during COVID. I think in the end, it turned out to be a bit of an opportunity for me.
Nice try. Still hate you though.
Well, we'll see what we can do about that.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk a lot about the book, but before I wanted to ask you a couple of questions from a clip I found on your website from I think one of your keynotes. The
Oh.
first question I have there is, why are you talking to dungeon masters?
So my son, who's now 20, is an accomplished dungeon master. When he was first starting out in D&D, he had no kids to play with, and I just love my son. He started his own D&D group and actually got funding through the town of Canmore to keep it going at the library. They were so supportive of what he was doing, and he built this great little gang. Well, he was still a new dungeon master, and most days he would come home and he'd be really excited about the story that he had written, the campaign he was leading, and how much fun everybody had had. But one day he came back from D&D and he was really down about it. He just sort of plopped on the couch and you could tell he wasn't very excited. And I said, what's going on? Normally D&D is so fun." He said, "I didn't do a good job leading them today." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I had written the story so tight that there was no room for them to make any other decision than what I had predetermined that they should make. And it turned out to not be very fun." He said very quickly, the players weren't really engaged. They felt like they had no impact, like no power in the game. They were kind of losing their enthusiasm for it. And he said, in fact, I wasn't enjoying it. And I stood there and I thought, Wow, it's like a good leadership lesson, right? Like you know where you want them to end up, but give them enough room in the middle to play and to innovate and to come up with their own great ideas. And he hadn't done that. So that is the connection that I make to the storytelling keynote that I delivered is that, a great dungeon master knows how to tell the stories that are going to inspire people to want to go with them, but not engineer it so tightly that there's no room for them to actually be in the story.
So you were just referring to people as dungeon masters. They weren't
That's
actual
right.
dungeon masters.
They were not actual
All right.
dungeon
Okay.
masters.
We,
I
we
was using a metaphor.
I
Yeah.
think I would be remiss if I didn't explain to anyone who has no clue what we're talking about that being a dungeon master is not a sexual kink,
No.
is a role playing game. Dungeons and Dragons is a role playing game. It's the clearest way to show anyone, or used to be when I was a kid, that you were a nerd. Like if you play D&D, you were a nerd. There was no escaping it. I don't know if that has changed now for your son's generation. I'm twice his age, but in my time, if you played D&D as I did, oh, that was it. You had to keep it hidden. If any girl found out you were playing
Oh, you were
D&D, I mean,
yeah, you weren't getting a date for
no,
sure. Yeah,
no.
no, but I think that has changed. So the nerds are cool now, right? Like Steve Jobs and even Bill Gates to some degree, like the techie guys are now top of the world, right? So the nerds are cool. And then on top of that, that series Stranger Things came out on Netflix and all those kids were playing Dungeons and Dragons. And apparently there's been like, I mean, it's never really gone away for the core group that loved it, but there's been a resurgence in Dungeons and Dragons. And what's so wonderful about that game is it's all driven by storytelling and the power of our imagination. When I finally sat down and played a game of D&D that my son was leading, being the dungeon master for, we also had his little brother at the table. And at the time, Julian was maybe 10 or 11, and my older son Sean uh, rolled the dice, and it turned out that Julian was going to kill the monster. And Sean said, "Okay, Julian, how do you want this to go down?" And Julian looked at his list of weapons, and he actually got up out of his chair, and he's like, "I throw a fireball at the monster, and I slay him with my sword," and it was this whole acting out. And I thought, wow, like our imaginations are so powerful. And I think as adults and especially going to work, we think about imagination when it comes to innovating new products, but I don't think we always apply that power of imagination to the way we communicate about what we're doing at work. And so it's just, I don't know, there's so many connections to how my kids are and how we could communicate better in our businesses.
Something else about that clip that I absolutely love is that at some point you're talking about Steve Ballmer, who used to be the sort
Yeah.
of the histrionic CEO of Microsoft, and I think the line you said is, Steve Ballmer threw his hands away, and then you
Yes.
started cracking up. Says, but they always came back.
You have to improvise in these talks. Everything anytime you get up in front of an
Mm.
audience, I think that you have to accept that there is no perfect. It just doesn't exist. We are beautifully imperfect human beings who are never going to execute a talk or a presentation or even a communication absolutely perfectly. And I think if you can accept that and just kind of go with it in the moment, you can have a lot of fun. And I believe, if I remember correctly, that was the biggest laugh I got, in the keynote, and probably, like, the most authentic, kinda connected moment, was because I screwed up a little bit, but I just kinda went with it.
Something else which I can't remember now if it's from the clip or from a podcast interview, but I think it's on the book as well, is an analogy that I'm trying to think there must be a way to do this live and it would be great. But it said something like, um, most communication that is information driven doesn't connect. And I think you had a statistic of something like 74% of that information doesn't connect. And you said something like it's just like throwing spaghetti at a wall. And I just imagine this thing you could do on a stage or even on Zoom, right, where you're just getting spaghetti and throwing it and saying this is what you're doing.
Yeah,
um
yeah.
so, what is the statistic exactly? Because that's not one I've come across before.
Yeah, so it was actually produced from a research study done in the States. I believe it was a presentation design firm. I'm not remembering the exact name of the researchers. I do have the reference, but they operate a presentation design firm in the United States, and they were trying to quantify what exactly it was that audiences disliked about presentations and how many of those presentations actually achieve what they're setting out to achieve, which is to persuade their audience. And the numbers are pretty shocking. It's something like 78% of presentations don't do anything to persuade the audience. And the biggest complaints from those audiences are that presentations are too long, they contain way too much information, and they don't contain information that is immediately relevant to the audience. So when I looked at that study, and there aren't a ton of studies done on the actual effects of presentations, but when I looked at that one, I thought, here I have clients who come to me, uh, a lot of them primarily to ask me, can you help me with my nerves, or can you help me be a better public speaker? And in their head, that means that they're going to stand a certain way, or they're going to hold their hands a certain way, or they're going to use the tone of voice. And I'm not saying none of that is important, but I don't believe you should start there. Based on what we know audiences dislike about presentations, you need to start with your content. You need to organize your information in a way that is going to be meaningful and relevant to your audience. You need to get rid of all the tangential information that you don't need, and you need to shorten that presentation. And the best way that I've found, since putting someone literally to sleep in a presentation where he snored out loud, the best way that I have found is story structure. It's what I learned to do at journalism school, to take vast amounts of information and craft a story that somebody else would want to read or listen to or watch on television. And so that's essentially what I teach my clients to do and what I do for them.
Any chance that the presentation company you're referring to is Duarte?
No, it's not Duarte. It didn't come from Duarte.
Oh,
No, it's another firm. So I would have to have the reference like right in front of me, which I don't have right now. But I can send it to you if you
please.
want to
And I'll,
share it
I'll
with
trade you.
them.
I'll trade you for one that I'm not sure if you've come across, but I thought it was pretty interesting. And
Mhm.
I just gave a keynote yesterday, and I used that one, which is I talked to them about one of the reasons why our communication is not particularly effective is that I don't know if it's because we think we're grown-ups or that we've convinced ourselves that we need to be professional. But as
Yes.
soon as we walk into the office, we start speaking in a way that no human being has ever spoken before. You'd never go out for a beer or a coffee with a friend and talk about synergies or how your priorities aren't aligned, because you'd sound like a crazy person. And then the research that I quoted was that in 2005, Princeton figured out that about 90% of students used more complicated language in their essays because they believed that it would make their arguments sound more valid and it would make them sound more intelligent. But audiences rated both the quality of the papers and the intelligence of the author as lower if they used more complicated language.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think NYU did a similar study, but relative to trust. So the same kind of vague, overcomplicated language actually reduces trust in the person receiving that message. And we know this because we watch politicians do it all the time. They get asked a question, they don't answer it. They can talk for a long time, but you never hear an answer to the question. It's not specific enough. It's not given in everyday language, and so we don't trust the answer. But it's funny how we forget that at work. There are a lot of good, like you said, Francisco, I would never go to dinner and say to my friends, how about we leverage our value added experience and get some alignment over at the other restaurant. Like, it's just not going to happen, right? I'm never going to speak that way. and yet walk through the door at work. And maybe it is because we learned it at university. Um, but yeah, walk through the door at work and that all goes out the window, and everyday language goes out the window. And I fall into that trap of using corporate jargon and sort of vague language. I feel like I should adjust my blind. You're not going to be able to see me in a moment.
I think
Can I?
if you do what you just did there, then it looks pretty cool. It's almost like a superhero mask. You know,
I think
it's
I
made of
think
sunshine.
I think your viewers will appreciate this better.
That might be
And they'll
slight.
forgive me jumping out of my chair
Well,
quickly.
I was working on the basis that you can see yourself on video. If you're happy with the sun in your face, who am I
Yeah,
to
no,
tell you
no.
otherwise?
I was looking for a good pause.
Yeah. So the way I've described this in the book I wrote about public speaking was that you should speak like you are at a bar, not at Broadway. Um,
Yes,
so
yeah.
which is a slightly different problem. This is not the business language problem. This is the problem that I think a lot of people end up with when they look for presentation coaching. They think that the delivery is where they need to work on, and then a lot of people end up with overdoing the delivery and
Yeah.
talking in a way that people don't normally talk, or moving in a way that people don't normally move. And in my book, I do everything before delivery. So it's content and stories and vulnerability and humor. And I start the delivery bit and say, well, I've told you everything you needed to know. That's it. You can go out and present. And then I leave like 3 blank pages in the book. And it's just like, wow, this was an easy chapter to write. And there's like 3 blank pages. And then after that, it's like, okay, I'll tell you something about delivery then. But yeah, I find that it is very easy to improve those things, but it's very rarely particularly relevant. And if you tell, and I do this when I'm training people, we do the storytelling part if I'm doing my presentations training, and then I say, when she was telling that story, what was her body language like? And people go,
Mm, mm.
it's like you didn't even notice anything, right? Like there was nothing to notice because you were in the story. You're like, yeah. So do you think maybe we should put more time into the story stuff than into the body language stuff? I'm like, oh yeah, maybe.
Well, and what I find interesting about that approach, Francisco, is that probably, I'm gonna guess based on my experience, is that not only did the audience stop caring about the body language, but the presenter's body knew what to do when you're telling a story. And so, these very stiff technical presenters who stand there, gripping their hands and not really moving around too much when they're just firing information at their audience, the minute they're naturally telling a story, oh, all of a sudden the hands loosen up. We've got a little bit of gesturing. We're modulating our voice because we know how to tell a story and we're emotionally in the story as well as the presenter. So a lot of those delivery issues kind of take care of themselves to a great degree. That's what I mean, I don't want to count ums for anybody. I just don't want to. I'm an ummer and somebody counted them for me, and it maybe was, tough love. But with my clients, yeah, in the same way. I don't want to sit there counting ums with them for an hour. So I'd rather teach them how to tell their stories.
Yeah, what I usually tell people is that it's a question of how knowledgeable and comfortable you are. Because again, if you have people telling a story and you've given them enough time to remember the story, they're not just doing it from the top of their heads, they don't usually and ah. And I say that the way to fix your ums and your ahs is to have as much of your content as possible to be something you know very well, and then you're not gonna and ah. Whereas if you're trying to memorize something and it's just like this disconnected bits, and you're like, okay, this is the part that I'm going to talk about, this other, then you're going to and ah, because you're just looking for
Mhm.
what to say next. But
Yeah.
if there's more stories, if there's more things that you've explained to people before in a natural way, then the ums and the ahs look after themselves.
Yeah.
So get into the stories now.
Mhm.
I have a bone to pick with you, and one to pick with us, all people that teach storytelling, perhaps. So the first one is that I've heard you say this on a podcast, and it was something like how we are all natural storytellers or something along those lines. And I could not disagree with that statement more, because we all love stories. I'll give you that. But I know. there's not many people in my life that I know that can actually tell any type of story to save their lives. So most of them are incredibly boring when they try to tell a story, if they do
Mhm.
try to tell a story. And when it comes to the realm of business communication and presenting, then it's even worse, because with friends, I do have some friends that in the WhatsApp group, they go, guys, I'm just sending you this audio because this thing happened, and then they will tell a pretty reasonable story because usually it's an interesting thing that happened. But the moment we walk into the office, uh, I think we can go, days and days and days watching presentations and seeing people explain things. And it's very, very rare that a single story comes up. So I'm sure there's plenty of caveats to what you mean when you say that people are natural storytellers.
Well,
But
so
I
this
just
is
wanted to highlight that.
I'm happy that you brought that up because I think this is a really important part of what a lot of presenters think is an impossible hurdle for them to jump is that yeah, you're asking me to do this thing called storytelling, but I'm that is not my natural happy place, and I don't think I can get there. Well, the reality is we're telling stories all day. So storytelling at its most fundamental form is observing data in the world around us, interpreting that data, and creating meaning for ourselves. We spend every waking moment in our day using story to filter what is happening in the natural world. And so, yes, you are a natural storyteller. Now, what you may not be comfortable with or be practiced at is being able to tell a story that is meaningful, has a very clear purpose, is told to the right person at the right time and in the right amount of time. And that's great news for you and me, Francisco, because that's why we have a business. But we're really not teaching anything these folks don't already know. When they were kids in kindergarten, they would tell a story about how they weren't the ones who, started the fight in the playground, or they weren't the ones who painted on the wall in the kitchen. So we've been telling stories for a long time. Uh, in the book, and that's partially why there's a big reason why I published the book is to show that you have this laying deep inside you, and we just need to kind of pull it out and show it to you and give you a method of telling these stories. So that's where the story compass came from, is to show that universal quality that storytelling has. We're already doing it, but here are 4 stories that you can tell at work, and here's how to tell them.
I'll get to the 4 stories in a bit, but let me carry on giving you a mildly hard time.
A hard
So
time.
this is something I'm not sure I had completely thought about before, but I definitely thought about when I was reading her book, which is that it's not the first time that I ever considered, because I've heard other people discuss how one of the biggest problems with storytelling and people who teach storytelling is what I think of as the hero's journey approach, in that the type of language that the hero's journey tends to involve, it makes it more complicated. And there's a lot of people, the guys from Anecdote, which you might be familiar with, they're very much against the hero's journey because they think that small stories are the ones that tend to get more
Mhm.
circulation in business. But it wasn't even that. What I was thinking about when I read your book is, I don't know if we I don't do this as much, but I do it to some extent. Is I don't know if we people that talk about storytelling sometimes don't make our jobs harder by talking about things like the hero's journey, or because we use examples like Hollywood movies. Like Star Wars is a very typical example, or The Lord of the Rings, or when we share stories from the real world, we are often sharing stories from startups that usually have gotten successful, or we're sharing stories from, I don't know, World War II, just to think of something that's in your book.
Mhm.
And what I was trying, it just hit me as I was reading that. I was like, okay, but like I know where you're going with that. I'm not your audience. But if you get someone that's completely lay person when it comes to storytelling, and a lot of the examples and a lot of the references we're using to explain it to them involve Hollywood, the war, or successful startups, um, I just wonder how many people look at those stories and then look at their own lives and struggle to make that connection. Whereas if a lot of the examples we're using are, small personal stories or small things that happen in the office, perhaps their connection between, oh, that's what you mean, like I can use a story. um so, off to you. Handle that hot potato now.
Okay, so I think there are two complaints that you have about the book. Okay, so the hero's
Just to be
journey. I
clear, it's not a complaint about your
Oh,
book.
no, no, no,
It's
I'm
just
teasing.
that almost everyone
Yes,
that talks
yeah,
about storytelling will commit those sins, as I'm now thinking of them, to one degree or another. This is not about you and your book. It's just that it just hit me while I
yeah,
was
yeah.
reading the book.
I think it's a fair point to make about the hero's journey. That is a long and that is an epic tale, right? George Lucas took 3 films to get through the entire thing the first time around with his Star Wars series. So yes, it's a huge epic. So the way that I use it in the book is not as a format for your stories, so you don't have to hit all of those points around the hero's journey in your little 90-second to 2-minute story. I use it more as a compass of who are you talking to right now and where are they on the journey with you? For example, if a management team goes into a boardroom and they're developing a new strategy for the sales team, through that process, they're basically already, even if part of it is in their imaginations, they're already going around that whole hero's journey. Here's what we're doing right now. We need to change because the market is changing this way. So let's develop a strategy that is going to help us overcome certain trials and tribulations. They're doing all of that mapping out, right? And then they're trying to figure out what are the big pitfalls. Like if we do launch this strategy, what's one terrible thing that could happen and how can we avoid that? And that's the ordeal. And then they come up with this plan that they want to now launch out to the sales teams. So they're already coming out of the monster's cave, they're seizing the treasure, and they want to bring that back as an elixir to their sales team and say, look what we spent 3 months figuring out at our retreat or whatever. We have this fantastic strategy for you. It's going to completely transform the way you're selling our products, and it's going to have huge success. Well, what they forget when they're delivering that message is their sales team is still sitting in ordinary. They haven't done the imagination exercise of going around that entire journey, and they are probably terrified because you're telling them there's going to be this massive change. It's going to change the entire way that they're doing their work. And if you don't think about that, if you don't consider that, okay, we've gone around the circle, we know how it's going to look, but these guys are still sitting in ordinary. And now we are actually calling them to adventure. We have to make a story that is going to take them into that unknowable future in their imaginations. That's a vision story. If you don't think about that and you just kind of, and I was on a sales team. I experienced this so many times in my meetings where, you know, director of sales or VP of sales would come out and say, "Oh, look what we're doing. We're so excited about it." And you're sitting there thinking, "Hang on a second. I've just spent a year figuring out how to do my job this way, and now you're changing it." So if you don't consider that, your message might fall flat. So that's how I use the hero's journey, is more as a compass of who's your audience? Where are they sitting on the journey? And now what kind of story might you need to craft to persuade them to keep moving with you? The story structure that I encourage people to use for each of those stories is actually the simple Freytag's pyramid that we all know and love: setting, challenge, solution, outcome. It's really simple and it keeps the stories nice and brief and focused.
I hate Freitag's pyramid. Uh,
How did I
I
know you were going to say that, Francisco?
because I'm in a contrarian mood, I think.
You
No,
are,
so
but I haven't. But you brought up another point. The examples that are used in the book. This tendency to go for the net, like I do in the book, the Netflix and the Kodak and Dollar Shave Club. who I actually really love, and some of the movie examples that I use. In my course, I use a lot more personal stories from my own experience coaching clients. And I do have some of those in the book as well at the beginning with my geologist presenter, just trying to do a presentation about the software that he's selling. But what I do find is that there is this quick point of connection. It's familiarity. So, although I will say my audiences are getting younger, and not all of them have seen Star Wars anymore or Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark, best movie ever made, but so many of them haven't seen it. So I got to switch up my examples. But there's a familiarity there that is an easy shortcut to understanding. I don't have to give as much context when I use Netflix as an example because people know it. If I'm talking about an engineer at a mid-size software company in Alberta, yeah, I'm probably going to have to spend a little bit more time giving context and laying the groundwork. So I think if you need a shortcut, then absolutely the famous examples stand up. That's my position.
Yeah, so the reason I say hate Freytag's pyramid is because I find the concept of falling action very confusing, and I actually think that the structure you use in the book is essentially the same structure I teach if I ever teach structure.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
there's a lot of things where we are a lot more similar than we're not. So for example, in my keynote, I do use the Steve Jobs example, but the way I describe the structure he uses is before, but, so, and after, which is essentially the exact same thing you
It is.
do, but I think you call it, was it setting, conflict,
Challenge.
solution, and outcome. So
Yeah.
it's the exact same thing, which which might be just one step further than the Aristotle's set a problem resolution basic
Mhm.
three-part structure. So I,
Yeah.
I I find Freytag, which I think is 5 sections, if you do it exactly the way
Mm.
it is, I find that more confusing than this four-part structure than it seems you and I are using.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
other one where I thought it was an interesting coincidence is because I just read your book in the last day and a half,
Mhm.
and you are the first person I've ever saw who works with storytelling that knows the Nelson Ferris story.
Oh, yeah.
And I've been
Yeah.
telling that for a long time, and I just tell it slightly differently because you focus or the way you go into that story is how Nelson Ferris became Nike's chief storyteller when they were having that massive PR issue with the sweatshops,
Mhm.
which I didn't actually know. What I did know is that he started doing the work of sort of the chief storyteller, at least as far as training went, in the late 70s. Because I know
Yeah.
he did the job for 40 years and then now he does something slightly different. So I didn't know the PR part. I knew that he was the one that started talking to leadership about telling stories in training. And I hadn't come across anyone else telling. I think I actually got the story from him on a podcast. I heard him
Oh,
tell
okay.
it.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
friend who used to work at Nike told me about Nelson Ferris. And then I went and found him on a podcast, listened to the story, wrote stuff down. So, maybe he didn't tell it right or I wrote it down wrong. But I don't remember that. Well, for obvious reasons, perhaps he wouldn't want to bring up the PR issue again. So he never talked about the PR issue and he talked about being chief storyteller. So that's perhaps
Yeah.
why I didn't have that connection there.
Yeah, it was just through my research that I remember that story, the "just do it," how that phrase became so negative in the end because of the association with what was happening in those factories, in Southeast Asia, and I remember there was a picture of one of the factories with that "just do it" banner across the top, and it really did become uh quite hard for Nike, but I mean, they're doing great, and I think they managed it in the right way. They realized we need to this needs to be a major part of our business. This isn't any longer just a nice to have at the training stage to introduce people to our culture, new employees to our culture. This is something we need to take quite seriously. So they're probably one of the earliest companies to do that.
Something you do in the book that I actually, I mean, I could have I can't speak anymore. I could see that becoming that it could have been an even bigger part of the book, and I could imagine that that is would be very different work you would do with companies if it's a consulting project and not so much workshops. Is the actual story compass idea, not in the let me teach you how to use storytelling for presentations or anything like that, but in the let's have a story that is so clear that you use it to filter your decisions through that story, and
Mm,
then you can't
mhm.
go off course, which is, I think, when you use the Nike example, or the in the Kodak example in the book, that is to me the most literal way of understanding this concept of a story compass. And it's something that most companies, they will have mission statements, and
Yeah,
terrible mission statements, and they will have values, and I'm here, inverted quote unquote values, which don't mean anything to anyone. And I don't know if any companies actually have a story that pulls all those things together and use that as a compass. So I
mhm.
think that to me was the most unique part of the book, and one part I enjoyed. And I think you could have done another 50 pages on it. I wouldn't have finished it because I only read it. I started it 2 days ago, but I could have seen that there was probably scope for another 50 pages on that particular but that's more high level strategic
Maybe you've just
concept.
given me the idea for my follow-up book,
Mhm.
Francisco. It's very true though, because I think part of understanding where you've been and what has happened to you, I mean, especially coming out of this global pandemic that we've all gone through, wouldn't it be lovely if these companies, in the interest of being able to adapt and change and be better in the future, wouldn't it be great if they were all holding storytelling retreats where they tell the story of what has happened to them since, March 2020? I worked with a client. She was a young farmer who was taking over her family farm, quite a big operation outside of one of the major cities here in Canada. I don't want to give her away too much. But she was in a very daunting position. She's in her late 20s. She had just gone through quite a nasty divorce during COVID. And so, a couple of challenges for her. Credibility, taking over this family farm. I mean, she's in her late 20s, young woman who looks quite young, and also just going through that personal ordeal during that time. Well, she was asked to speak at a conference, and the conference organizer told her, "This is going to be all storytelling. We want to hear your stories from the pandemic." And she thought, "Oh man, like, no, number one, the stories that I have to tell," she thought, makes me cry. And if I sit up there, a young 20-something-year-old, blonde too, which, always helps, and cry, I'm going to lose all credibility with this farming community with whom I'm trying to connect and create credibility. So she came to me and she said, "I have to figure out what stories I can tell and get through without bursting into tears," basically. Well, when we did the storytelling work, she realized that all the stories that we built, yes, they talked about the challenge and the conflict, but then they come out of that darkness into the light and go into this outcome that is really positive. And when I was showing her the connections, between the setting and the outcome, and how she had transformed and moved through this experience, she said at the end, she went to the conference and she called me after and she said, "I nailed it. Like, it went so well. And I was so excited to tell my stories." But she said, "I have to tell you, the other effect of our time together is that I now see the last year very differently." Very differently. She came to me saying, "What a horrible year. All these terrible things happen. It's been, how can I even talk about this without crying?" But at the end of our time together, she saw the last year as a time of accomplishment and overcoming her challenges, and and how much and showing how much strength and capability she has, and good instincts. So now she can go into the next year, 2 years running this farm with all those stories behind her that are telling her, you can do this and you're going to do it and you're going to do it your way and it's probably going to work out great. So I think, yeah, wouldn't it be great if companies were doing that right now? Telling their stories and crafting them so well that it propels them into the future with a lot more certainty about their own capability and ability to meet that future.
Yeah, there's one story. There's one story I love, and feel free to steal because I've stolen as well from somewhere else. um, because one of the stories you talk about, so the four types of stories you talk about in the book are the vision story, which I think is self-explanatory.
Mhm.
You have the journey story, which is I think what I would normally call the origin story.
Origin story, yeah.
You have the knowledge story, which I call the lessons learned story, and then you have the value story, which is one I don't have a name for. Value is a good one, and in the book you talk about Joshi, which is a story I've seen from a few different people. I think Scott Stratton is one of the most famous people that shares the Joshi
Mm,
story,
mhm,
about
mhm.
the little. For anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, it's this kid forgot a little teddy bear at the Ritz Carlton, and then his father got terrified that the kid wouldn't be able to sleep, and told the kid, "Oh, he stayed in the resort," and then he spoke to the hotel, and the hotel not only agreed to take a picture with with Joshi by the pool, but also took pictures of him at the spa and with all the staff and everything. And the story I like to tell when I'm trying to explain that use is from Danny Meyer, who's a big lover of stories. He's the owner of Shake Shack and Union Square Cafe, and it's that he went one day to Union Square Cafe, which is one of his higher end restaurants in New York, and he sat next to this family and started eavesdropping, which apparently is something he does regularly. And the family was a father, a mother, and a young adult daughter. And he quickly realized that they were all from a small town in the US, and the daughter had just moved to New York, and the parents were a bit concerned about her. So she had taken them to this nice restaurant to show them some of the best parts of New York, and everything is going great until they get to the dessert. And then the father says, "What? $42 for a glass of dessert wine? This is what's wrong with these people. That's why I don't want you here." And before Danny Meyer can do anything, the waiter rushes into the kitchen, comes back holding a bottle of wine and three small glasses. He stops by the table and says, "First of all, I want to thank you again for spending the evening with us. And second, I couldn't help but overhear you. And this is the wine, the dessert wine you were talking about. It's the best one we have in the house. It's actually considered one of the best in the world. And we would love it if you were to try it on us." So he puts down these
Oh,
three little glasses, pours a little sip in each. They all have the wine. It's actually fantastic. And the mood in the table changes immediately. As the
mhm,
family leaves the restaurant later on, we can guess that the parents were feeling a little bit better about their daughter's decision. And Danny Meyer took that story and stories like that and went back to the office and started sharing that instead of talking about initiative and customer service and going above and beyond. This says, "This is what I'm expecting from you." That's it.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, and that's a great value story. If you want your employees to behave in a way that, they are empowered, we can say to our employees, "Look, you're empowered to make decisions, and you just need to make decisions that boost our brand, and you need to show initiative," like you point out. Okay, maybe I know what that means. I mean, I think if you and I were working for the exact same company, Francisco, and somebody said, just act with initiative, you and I might interpret that in slightly different ways because we each have different past experiences. But tell me that story, and now I get it. I can see a concrete example of what we as a company value, and therefore I know, okay, I can behave in that way. I can probably do things that are similar.
All right, so there's one thing from the book, and I don't know if this was a book choice, a book decision, or if this is just some how you approach storytelling, teaching storytelling in general, which is that um, you talk about structure, you talk about types of stories, but what you I didn't think you talked about at all was how to actually more the nitty gritty of how to tell a story, right? So, for example,
Yeah.
I have when I do workshops, or in the online course I have, which and the coaching that goes with it, I find myself spending a lot less time on structure than I spend on things like, do they have a moment or moments in the story? Are they putting dialogue in? Is it obvious the character arc, because however they end up at the end is something they were the opposite of in the beginning, and things of that nature. So more the editing or the crafting of the story itself, and not so much structure, type, and that type of thing. So that's not on the book. Was that a book
Mhm.
choice, or is that?
Mhm.
Hmm.
It was a bit of a book choice, and you're absolutely right. We know as facilitators, we spend a lot more time. I mean, the thing is, as soon as you teach structure, people are nodding. Yeah, totally get it because they already know this. It's deep down inside of them. That's how they spend their time interpreting their world. So they get it. It's very intuitive. Even when I go through the hero's journey as a compass and then show the four story types, they're nodding. Yep, I get it, and now let's practice. And that's when we hit the massive speed bump, right? And they realize, oh, okay, this is actually pretty hard. And now you get into precisely what you've just described, which is the true art of storytelling. And there are story devices like repetition and contrast and analogy that you want to use to make your stories come alive. And you want to make sure, I talk about the snake eating its tail in the book, and that's a hint to how to make a good ending playing off your beginning. But that really comes through in the coaching with me. So yes, it was a bit of a decision to keep the book manageable and short, also to leave room for another book. So now you've given me ideas for two books. So I'm going to have to put you in my acknowledgments. I'll say, I'll say thank you to Francisco for the book ideas, and I look forward to debating to debating the books with you on your podcast, which is making for a very interesting conversation, by the way. But yeah, so there's room for another book. And I think that is why I just, we hire people to help us do strength training. We work with a coach on our business. We work with a life coach. We go to the dentist to help us with our dental care. Why would you not hire somebody who can help you do the one thing that is probably going to transform your business really quickly, and hire a professional storyteller to help you learn the art of storytelling? Because I think primarily that happens in the room with someone like you, Francisco, where they are really like they're doing it and you're giving them immediate feedback, and you can hear the moments in their story when they don't, and you can point that out to them, and then they practice again and they have this feeling of success. I love that in my workshops. And I try to explain to my clients when they're booking these things with me is that, yeah, we can go through the theory. It's going to be great. And it will be great, but we need a lot of time for practice. If you want your people to do this well, we need a lot of time for practice.
Yeah, that's something where I find that the biggest challenge with any type of communication or presentation workshop that is going to involve storytelling is them finding the stories. And I know people that just have homework, so they say you have to find X amount of stories and these types of stories beforehand. One thing I've found, and again, this will not necessarily be business stories, but if I'm just trying to teach them, you can tell a story, and these are some of the things you use to make it better. I use something that is not mine, and I don't know who originally started this, but I call it first, last, worst, best. And then I
Mm,
just have a big table of things like kiss, car, pet, trouble, boss, teacher, injury, job. And then, the first and the worst get you lots of mileage. Like what I've done with people is, I don't know if I should admit this in public, but I like having the most embarrassing icebreaker I can almost just about think of. A friend of mine has people sing. like karaoke before they start doing presentations training, because he says, well, it can only get better after this, right? I don't like that. I hate singing. So what I do is I share the most embarrassing story I know of myself, and then I have them do the same. And then sometimes people are a bit stuck, and I say, okay, just think about firsts and worsts, and I give them the kiss, the job, the
Mhm.
whatever, and people go, oh, got it, got it, got it. Can I just do one story because I got three worst kisses? It's like, that doesn't make sense, but
Okay. That's a great one. I
yeah.
like that. I might steal that one too.
No, no, but well, I mean, again, I heard it originally from Mark Brown. Then I found that Matthew Dix has, like, he calls it like the order of those things change. Some people say last first, best worst, and some
Yeah,
people
yeah,
like, I just picked one that I thought made sense.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
that's one way where I found that, because to me that's the biggest challenge, the bridge that people need to cross, and that our job is to teach them how to do that. Is, okay, you've bought into the idea of storytelling, you believe that it's super powerful, but most people, I think, their challenge is not the telling or the crafting of the stories, it's just finding the stories. Because if you just said to them, here's a very, 2-minute business story that illustrates this point, just go and tell it, most people can probably do a reasonable job
Yeah,
at sharing the blockbuster story, right? Or something like that. So, what I think is that the challenge is, okay, yes, you can Google a whole bunch of stories. Yes, you can collect them from business books or podcasts and all of those things, but you should also have personal stories. And
mhm,
and how do you find the personal stories? And I
mhm.
find that once people find like one or two, then finding 10 becomes a lot simpler, because they go, oh, that's a story. Like, I can use that. Like, yes, yes. Like, I just helped my kid was terrified climbing this giant metal octopus this past Sunday, which is like a playground thing in Barcelona, and she was terrified. She wanted to get off. She wanted my help. There was no way I could go in there inside the octopus and help her. I had to talk her through it. And essentially, I just made her believe that she could do it. And then I gave her some basic instructions. Then she knew what she was doing. That's what coaching is. All right, that was it. It lasted 30 seconds, the thing in my life. And then I thought, that's kind of a bit like coaching. And,
Yeah,
and that's it. And I can now use the story for the rest of my life as what a coach is supposed to do. Um,
yeah,
and I just think people don't see it as stories. I think that's one of the
yeah.
major obstacles.
I think it is. I think you're absolutely right, and they're not actively listening for them or watching for them and collecting them. You know, I give my clients something called the Story Compass journal, and it's just pages of journal pages for them to start recording these things, because the stories are happening everywhere. Your story reminds me of the story of my son coming home from the D&D game and feeling really frustrated with how that went. You know, it's similar. If once you start listening for them though, and seeing them and making those connections, you're absolutely right. Then it becomes a lot easier. And I think the other big challenge for people too is being a little bit vulnerable. So not everybody is comfortable being vulnerable. I think we're seeing a bit of a vulnerability movement in business right now, with you have to be authentic and be vulnerable and emotionally intelligent, but that's not a comfortable place for everybody. And I do believe a lot of business professionals think that, well, if I show vulnerability, I'm showing weakness, or especially if you're selling, if I talk about any problems that my company may have experienced or any chinks in our armor, we're going to lose credibility with our customer. It's exactly the opposite. Again, because we all know that we go through trials and tribulations, we don't trust the people who act like they don't. So we want to see a little bit of the challenge that uh, you've overcome, but that requires being a bit vulnerable. So yeah, I agree with you. I think finding stories, it can be challenging at the start, but you can develop a habit of doing it, and then it becomes a lot easier. And also accepting that some of those stories are going to show a little bit of your bear a little bit of your soul to your listener.
Well, you are preaching to the converted, because the book I wrote was called Bear, A Guide to Brutally Honest Public
Ah,
Speaking. And it has a Clark Kent type of character opening his shirt, and all you see is his gruesomely drawn beating heart. Uh, yeah. So the thing about vulnerability, and this is something that people get stuck upon, which is and I've used this example before because I think it just illustrates it perfectly. I say, let's say you're having a problem with your, say, your phone company, right? They're just, or you're paying
Mhm.
too much, and then you tell a friend that, and it's like, I just don't know what to do. Like my bills just come up so high every month. Let's say friend number one says, "Oh, okay, I never had that before, but doesn't seem like a big problem. I'm sure I can help you figure this out." Or friend number two says, "Oh man, I had that last year. It was a nightmare. It happened to me for about 6 months until I finally figured out how to fix it." So yeah, I'm pretty sure I can give you some idea of what you can do. Like, who do you want helping you? Like, of course you want friend number two who's gone
Mhm.
through it and come out the other side. And
Yeah.
I think when it comes to business, the other thing is, if you don't show the struggle, which is really all you need, we're saying when we say vulnerability, show that you didn't absolutely know how to do it from the first moment. Show that you had to sort of work through it. Because if you don't, you also undervalue the work you've done. Because if it's like, yeah, we got this
Yeah.
project, it was pretty easy, we knew exactly what to do, we just did it, took us 5 seconds. Well, why are we paying you all this money then? Uh, 'cause no,
Well,
this was
this
a
is it.
challenge. We put our best minds to
Absolutely.
in it.
And that's why it's so important for companies to start a bit of a tradition of sharing their knowledge stories. And it's the only way that we can learn and make our projects better for developing software. It's the only way we're going to get better at that. But if you are in the habit of sharing those knowledge stories, they might eventually become the value stories that you share with your clients about yourself, saying, look, exactly what you said, last year we went through this. I worked with a um, IT architecture firm in Denver one year, and they were developing huge systems for companies to be able to have their workforce work remotely. This was in January before COVID. Like, can you imagine the just yeah, they didn't know what was coming, but they were trying to sell their services to basically set up this whole system a company could have their workforce work remotely. And they had gone through the same thing. About 18 months earlier, they had done their own digital transformation to make sure that their employees had the option to work remotely. And they had gone through all sorts of problems and, had all sorts of trip ups and made so many mistakes. That became part of their presentation is that, look, we're the best people to help you out because we've done this already and we made a mess in so many different ways, but we learned lessons from that. We got better at it as we went along, and now you have the advantage of doing this on the back of the lessons that we learned. So, yeah, I think it's really important that companies understand that. Another interesting statistic, or another interesting idea from Home Depot when I was working with them, they have a branch. Home services where they do hire contractors to come into your home and do the work. And what they realized was if a contractor comes into your home, say he's working in the kitchen doing the tiling, and he puts up all the tile just perfectly. It's exactly the tile you ordered. He puts it up in the way that is exactly the way you specified, comes in right in on budget and on time. The highest customer satisfaction rating that contractor is likely to get from you is about a 7.5 or an 8. Now, if the contractor comes in and he messes up the tile, puts all the tile in, and you walk in and you say, "That's not what I ordered," but he handles it really well. He says, "Okay, no problem. We're gonna fix it. No extra charge to you. We're gonna go and make sure this is done still on time." And there's a bit of a hurdle there, a bit of a conflict there. Now the contractor is probably going to get a 10 rating on the customer satisfaction survey. Home Depot knows this. Now, it's not that they're sending out their contractors saying, okay, screw up a little bit. Okay, we want higher ratings, but they just know that we're all human. We're all fallible. And it's okay to make a mistake. It's more important how you handle that because the mistakes are going to happen.
Yeah, I think I've been taken for many years without knowing a Home Depot approach to being a husband and now a father. screw up a little
Mhm.
bit, try hard, improve, get higher grades because of it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Right. So um, I know that you like the ends to be connected to the beginnings, the Ouroboros snake eating its own tail. I'm a big fan of that. I often tell people that they need to close the circle when they're doing a presentation, when they're doing a speech, and I always try to do that myself. So I think it's only fair to say that I no longer hate you, Colleen.
Okay. What a wonderful ending, Francisco.
Right. So if you want people to find out more about the Story Compass is being sold. Well, it's in the UK, in the US and Canada, but I don't think you've bothered putting it up on the other Amazons, which you
No,
should.
maybe I need to. I
Yeah,
need
just
to get
put
it
them
up
out
on the
there.
other
I,
Amazons.
I, I, I've,
Okay,
I've got my book every Amazon that they let
everywhere?
me. And who
Okay.
knows it? Sometimes you do get sales. I get sales from Australia, I get sales from all over the place. Not that many sales, I must say, but
Well,
but but enough sales to say that I've sold books around the world.
okay, well, that's wonder yeah, I know you're an internationally selling author,
Uh,
so that's what I'm gonna have to do. I have it in Mexico, the US, and Canada,
mm,
so I will branch out now, Francisco.
yes, please. So that's the Story Compass, and then if people want to see more of your work, where they should go to.
Perfect Pitch Pros, pros.com is the website. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's a quick way to connect. And if you do want to buy the book and you're overseas, then just message me and I'll get you a copy for sure. I am on Instagram as well, Story Compass, although I have to say I'm not as good on Instagram as I am on LinkedIn. Probably better to find me on LinkedIn or the website.
Yes, I'm not even on other social media. I one
Yeah,
one is enough for my sanity. So
exactly. That's how I feel about it. So, yeah,
all right, I'll put all that stuff. I'll put all the stuff in the show notes. And thanks for coming on. This was a lot of fun.
it was a pleasure, Francisco. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves, and until next time.